had some really quite interesting feedback around where some of the barriers to adoption to digital are and some of the complications of implementing a system from a financial perspective. They've been looking at case studies that can also be provided to them to support the project, and undertaking an analysis both of the initial benefits that they've been able to glean from those interviews and the roundtables that they've completed, and also looking at any written evidence of cost benefit that they've been able to contain from different reports that are already being developed by the system. Some of the things that may resonate from you, and I'm totally open to a discussion about these, that there is likely to be overlap and interdependencies of technology, so it needs to be flagged up that you can't necessarily look at investing in a single digital tool without looking at what might happen to other pieces of technology, and in particular the workforce that are being expected to use it and how they're going to work within the different systems. Lots of implementation discussion, and some of the values that have been brought forward have been about the hidden costs. Maybe when you set out to do a digital implementation of a system, you had a sort of 3-month or a 6-month window in mind, and that has quite often taken many providers longer to do it because they've worked on a phased rollout because they felt that it's been easier for them to deliver through the operations of the business. And that we really need digital champions. We need people that are fantastically well versed in being part of the agenda for change, you know, if they're not major digital users, but it does help if there are people that are pretty digitally competent in the first instance, taking on some of the roles of ambassadors around the organisation to get these projects moving. One of the things we're really interested in this discussion is not just the qualitative impacts, but everything else that's also happening to the organisation when it takes on digital systems. The model is going to provide an indicative return on investment, so a sort of financially structured model for any provider interested in accessing a new digital software technology product. There may be some competencies around hardware included in there, but primarily we've been looking at software systems. And the model will present indicative returns on investment for the provider based on their existing evidence, and also distinguishes impacts across both a residential care setting and a home care setting. But I'm really interested to find out a bit more about where you sort of went on your evaluation of the financial aspects of digital procurement that you undertook in the systems and services that you run. And I'm interested from a time, staff, benefit evaluation, quality of operational service improvement, capability as well, cost, time and resource saving, and whether you've been able to think about interoperability and connectivity between these systems and how that might have impacted the bottom line of the return on investment.
Your first question about considering the non-financial benefits, I mean, I think you kind of have to. I work for community integrated care. We're a charity, so, you know, we're not about making surpluses or anything like that, but, you know, we've got to be financially viable. So our investment is always about the value that the investment makes, not necessarily the pounds and pence that it creates on the back of that investment. So, you know, for an organisation like us, the non-financial benefits are probably more critical than the financial benefits. And everything we looked at, you know, when we implemented systems, it's always been about what's the impact on the front line and what can it do to transform the front line. You know, people work in social care because you want to look after people. They don't work in social care because they want to be IT experts. So, you know, the technology that we put out to the front line, the benefits have to be around freeing up time for people to move away from doing administrative tasks and, you know, free that time up to spend face-to-face time with the people that we want to support.
I have a quick question for you there. What percentage of your spend corresponds to tech spend then in this case?
It's hard to quantify, but what I would say is in terms of pure IT, it's about 2%. But in terms of everything that we do around technology, the data stuff and the investment that we make in the innovation part, which is, we're trying to look at new models of care using technology, you're probably looking at somewhere like 5%.
And this is very interesting because, 5% is at par with financial sector. That's how much they spend on technology and IT.
It's interesting you said people join care to care. That's carers who join are there to care. And then you referred later to the fact that we want to incentivize people to come into care. And one of the things I found talking to people is that, and there was a focus on this on various conferences I've been to about attracting younger people into care, is that working with technology has that effect of bringing people in. Yes, they want to care, but they're excited by technology. So if they can combine the two, it's a win-win. So that's one of the, now it's more theoretical at the moment than practically researched. But there is this thing of getting younger people into care, the recruitment stuff at the beginning, by using technology. There is a factor of being an exciting type of career to start.
It is really interesting that there is something about feeling valued and having a sense of worth and a sense of purpose that attracts a much younger generation to care if you sort of position the roles in the right way. But as you say, using high quality tech products around it can make it much more appealing. Certainly I've seen services really benefit from bringing younger people in and them going, oh, actually we can buddy up with maybe some of the older people within our team who are brilliant carers and are teaching us the job but are still struggling with, where is everything in the care planning tool, how do they access things, quickly and easily, and sort of that peer-to-peer support that really comes from having sort of digital natives involved is essential, I think, within organisations, particularly as our average age of employee is maybe a bit older and not as tech enabled as some of those younger people.
So they have a system that records everything. They're very, very far in terms of their digital journey. And so they work with people with complex support needs, people with what's described as challenging behaviour. And they'd had a commissioner come along and say to them, well, look, over the last 12 months, this person has had X fewer occasions where they've become distressed and their behaviours become challenging. And on that basis, we think it's right now to reduce the package of care and support. And what the provider was able to do was to say, well, look, I'm just going to stop you there for a second. And I'm going to show you in the data all the things that we did to make that happen. And it goes even to the level of detail of saying, this support worker stepped back 2 paces in order to give the person a bit more space. That's the level of detail they're recording at. And what they were able to do was to challenge that commissioner's decision and challenge the idea that the person, the care and support needs had reduced. They hadn't reduced. What was happening was the provider was meeting that person's needs, and they needed to continue to be paid for that in order for that person to have the best life possible. And it worked. So it's just really one example of how systems can make a difference in terms of the care that you described, but also when we look really hard, we can start to see ways in which we can put a pound sign against some of that stuff. I think most of my experience of this is that the decisions we've made in the organisations I've worked for have tended to be fairly intuitive. We think this system is a good idea because, and we'll look at different alternatives, but the idea of why we want the system, we don't necessarily critique that very closely or ask ourselves too many searching questions about it. We tend to do it on the basis that it feels like a sensible thing to do. But when we start looking at it really closely, there will usually be a way we can describe some of the harder reasons for doing that, the more tangible reasons for doing that. And I just wanted to give that one example. I also wanted to just briefly speak to your point about how it is that you've funded the development work you've done, because clearly in reality, services do need to make a surplus, because it's the surplus that they make that allows them to fund development, whether that's in terms of the service on the ground or tech solutions and development in tech solutions. So it's one of the things I think this piece of work can point to is to help local authority and integrated care system commissioners to understand if these services are not operating with a decent, sensible, realistic margin, there won't be the development funds for things like tech solutions. And actually, that's not in anybody's interest. It's not in the interest of the supported people, their families, the support workers, the leaders in services. It's actually really important for local authority commissioners and integrated care system commissioners and the CQC to have access to the best quality data. I'd also say to that, it's really important that we keep our eye on the ball with this, though, isn't it? Because the tech solution does need to generate more time and space for the human interaction. At the end of the day, you know where you started your conversation was about the reason people care and what actually matters, which is the quality of the care and support people receive, which is all about the relationship they have with the staff that support them and their families and the rest of it. So it's about just being really mindful about that those solutions are intended to create more space, more time for those relational interventions.
Thinking absolutely. But then there are people that can afford to fund in a totally different way, like the member Clive was alluding to. They've spent, you know, an inordinate amount of money compared to a traditional care home, for example, on their digitisation journey. But it's brought them such value. Whether they would ever say that it's broken even and given them a full return on investment, I don't know. I don't think we've ever been able to get down to that level of detail, but they're so assured of what they're developing, and how they've developed it is so innovative and brings them, you know, really high CQC quality ratings, and also really creates the right culture, the right people working with them. They don't have any retention problems, hardly, compared to, again, looking at more traditional models of care provision where people are still churning through staff on a routine and regular basis, because there's so much more to the offering. I think it speaks to some of the things Paul was talking about, and certainly that you were as well, Sanga, which is you've got to look at top line and bottom line return on investment, but somewhere through the middle is a kind of golden nugget of the qualitative and the quantitative return that can be seen within an organizational structure, and how that is built, I think, is certainly really, really of interest for me from an art perspective, because it's not as black and white as just putting in a model and squirting in some numbers at the front end and hoping that you're going to come out with something that could be taken up to board and compels a case for a 200k investment, for example, in the system.
There's such a huge spectrum of tech solutions available now that any care provision of any size need not be bogged down by just thinking about the fact that, okay, you know, what would fund us next year or the year after. There's such a variety of options available, and nobody has to go, you know, all shining dancing in the first go. There are so many options to choose from. And even if anything that kind of pushes them from, let's say, level 1 to level 2 in terms of saving time, saving money, even that's a way to start, you know. I mean, even if they start small, that's still a way, you know, that's still a journey into digitization. And that is something that ideally, you know, even smaller care provision should look at.
Absolutely. We would 100% back that. I think what is interesting is providers quite often come to us and say, well, which system? Sometimes a bit overwhelmed by choice. And I suppose that is part and parcel of the problem, is how we unpick some of the guidance and support to providers to say that sort of this is level 1 basket of tools and resources. Obviously, there are some within digital social care and the NHS frameworks that are sort of pre-approved suppliers. But in certain circumstances, and, you know, I know Paul has obviously talked about one of the bigger providers there, your service model might not fit into that development journey, and you also might feel quite sort of put off by trying to develop a specification for the operational tools, which again is some of the guidance and support mechanism that we try to deliver.
Yeah, it also starts from that objective. I think Paul was mentioning this, that what is the objective at a particular point for any care home. And what we are finding regularly is, given that they're in such a different phase of their journey, their expectations are very different. Like some of our clients, they wanted an audit software before they even went into a care management software, while, you know, traditionally, or a classical thinking would say, go and invest in a care management software, maybe, and, you know, HR rostering software. But it's interesting to see that various people are at various phases of their journey, and it all gets dictated by what they want to achieve. So I think it will be really interesting to map that level 1, level 2 kind of landscape, but then, people will continue to choose based on what their priorities are as well.
Whether you on-site or whether you cloud store data, because that brings up a really interesting conversation about cybersecurity. I know we were very briefly touched on that, Paul, and we have had a couple of quite significant cyber attacks within the software solutions that are available to the care sector in the last 12 to 18 months. So have you any thoughts on, is one strategy with having routers and on-site versus cloud-based cheaper? Have you got any ideas about how we think about that, or offer solutions to providers to think about the differences between on-prem and cloud?
I mean, that's a big question. I mean, my approach is always to kind of risk and cyber has been to kind of, spread your eggs as far as you can, kind of thing. So, I mean, we're very hybrid. We have various systems in the cloud. Some are in AWS, some are in Azure. We have we don't really have any on-prem anymore, but we have hosted hosted data centers. So systems that we manage and we look after, but they're obviously in tier 3, tier 4 data centers. So we get all of the resiliency and high availability. Is there a right approach to it? I don't think there is a right approach. I think, what we've seen in the past is that organizations with on-prem systems have been attacked and had ransomware events, and systems in which are SaaS provided have also had ransomware attempts and been cyber attacked. I mean, so I don't think one is better than the other. I mean, I think, one of the things that I have found across my career, I think, in social care is that, social care, we've been very good at kind of being innovators and implementing, real good pieces of technology or good innovative solutions. But where we've lacked is in some of the discipline that you might find in the NHS to make sure that you've got real good governance in place, that everything's documented. You've got detailed processes. You've got an ISMS that is aligned to an industry standard such as ISO 27001. We've not done a lot of that stuff, and it's that kind of, in a way that the kind of, like, I always call it, like the non-sexy side of IT. It's all the documentation, it's all the paperwork, it's all the boring stuff. We get into a point where that now is as important as the innovation, because that is what allows you to recover when you do have a cyber attack, knowing that you've got a documented BCP that's regularly tested, knowing that you've got a cyber recovery plan, having all of this stuff in place. And I think that is where the social care sector is still a little bit immature when you compare it to the likes of health and local authority. And